Hey folks, let's talk about the stone masonry of Vinapu. Vinapu is one of the most famous parts of Rapa Nui, or Easter Island as a lot of people want to call it. The locals call it Rapa Nui, so do I. Anyway, Vinapu is this Ahu, a platform upon which Moai stand. And it has incredibly sophisticated architecture. The stones are multi-ton and perfectly fit together. Now, I was there last March and I got a good look around Vinapu and I looked at how the architecture was, and there were these straight lines between these giant stones. There were also littler stones that just kind of fit in perfectly. Also, the seams between stone to stone are so tight that you really couldn't even jam a knife between them. So it's excellent, excellent architecture, and there are few places on the island that look like this. So much so that people have said that maybe this Vinapu architecture was inspired by or even built by the Inca. So it's gotten this famous, somewhat oversized reputation as this special place of contact on Easter Island. That theory's been out there since the times of Thor Heyerdahl. But while I looked around the entire island, I actually discovered that there are more than just Vinapu as far as Ahus that have this beautiful architecture. So I found three of them out on the west and towards the north coast. And we're going to talk about that today in this video. Now, just to be clear, I did not find these things. One of them is really just a major tourist site like the other ones, like Vinapu. But I saw them for myself for the first time, and very few people walk out there, so it's worth sharing to you. Now, first about Vinapu. Vinapu is this section of tourist ready now sites along the southern coast of Rapa Nui. It's actually the closest to the town. The town is Hangaroa, then there's a big volcano and the airstrip, and then just on the other side of the airstrip is where Vinapu sits, close to the coast. And one of its three Ahus is very, very nicely made. As I said, megalithic stones, some of them standing taller than me. Nowadays, they don't let you get very close to it. The Rapa Nui people don't like you to even touch the Ahu, which is totally their prerogative. But I did take some pictures to show the scale and how big it was. Another interesting side note to note about Vinapu is that the one that we get all these pictures from that we call Vinapu, that particular Ahu is actually not Vinapu. The area is called Vinapu. There are three Ahus in there. The one with the famous, very nicely fit stones is actually Ahu Tahira. And Ahu Vinapu stands just to the left of it when you're standing there looking at the big stones. And it has big stones too, but it's not as impressive. So, funny little side note there. The Ahu that everybody calls Vinapu is actually Ahu Tahira. But anyway, let's talk about these other three examples I found. So many things say on the internet that Vinapu is this standalone, nothing else like it on the island. I'm going to show you three that are very similar. Some of them might even be better. The first of those three is the most accessible. It's called Ahu Tepeo. And from the last place that you can park a car, you can walk out along this dirt road about 2 miles and get to it. Along the way to Ahu Tepeo is Ana Tahu, which is a cave, a big, deep cave. It's kind of fun to walk around in there. Again, it's the tourist route. So my friends led me and my group there, and we got to go down into this big, huge cave. It was one of the caves that they hid in during their vicious civil war. Inside the cave, you can actually see stone walls that they had built up to defend themselves, and a section with light coming in where they were doing all their gardening. So for decades, maybe generations, people were living inside this cave. But anyway, that's a side note. As you walk past the cave, about another mile along, you get to the territory which is Ahu Tepeo's area. It's actually a big village. And as you walk down the hill towards the ocean, you go through all sorts of house platforms, these boat houses called haripangas. You also go through all these wild horses. Wild horses are walking around all through the ruins, and you see Ahu Tepeo down on the coast. And it doesn't look like much from above. It looks like a pile of rubble when you're approaching it. But then when you walk around the front and get to the side that faces the ocean, that's where you see its very beautiful architecture. Just like Vinapu, it's got stones that fit together perfectly. Now, they're deteriorated a little bit. There hasn't been much archaeology there at all, but you can see how they would fit together perfectly. Ahu Tepeo also has one of those chinking stones, those wedge stones, littler ones that fit into there. So you really see there's a similarity in the architecture, and it's definitely similar in both quality and size. So our first one is Ahu Tepeo. That is a wonderful place that few people walk out to, and it is a lot like Vinapu. Vinapu's not the only kind of megalithic, tightly fit architecture on Rapa Nui. The other two Ahus that are the same quality as Vinapu are way out on the west coast. You've got to go to the end of where cars can go and then walk. About 2 miles in, we got to Tehare. And again, it looks like nothing from above, but as you walk around the front of it, all of a sudden you see its megalithic architecture. In this case, the stones are very tall, bigger than the ones in Vinapu. Perhaps not as well put together, but you definitely see that technique of fitting giant stones perfectly together along its face. This one has never been touched by archaeology, so it's a little dilapidated, but that's understandable. No one has tried to shore it up. At Vinapu, we had, since the times of Thor Heyerdahl, people kind of fixing it up, moving it around. We're not really sure how much of it was reconstructed, but they might have just put the stones back together just a little bit. There's a scarcity of notes when it comes to the early days of Molloy and the other archaeologists. All that being said, you can still see that these things fit perfectly together, even if they're a little rocked apart. Another really interesting aspect of Tehare is that on its far right side, one of its megalithic stones that are very nicely fit in there is an old reused moai. So the statues that were up above that represented their ancestors, those things become just stones. And so that stone is in Tehare as one of the megalithic stones. But that's example number 3 of this really tightly fitting megalithic multi-ton architecture on Rapa Nui. The third example of Vinapu-like architecture or stone masonry is about another half hour's walk out, maybe as much as an hour, away from Tehare, walking north along the west coast. I don't really know what its name is. It looks to be near a part called Hanga Omoi, but other maps that I see make it perhaps it's one called Ahu Te Moa. It's funny, there are no signs out there, no one walks out there, so it's hard sometimes to tell one from another. So this one, which is actually one of the most beautiful we saw, I'm not sure what its name is. I'm still working on that. Just honest 100% there. So anyway, this one has the largest stones of any of them. This is, so whether it's, let's just call it Ahu Te Moa. Might be wrong about that. Ahu Te Moa, as we walk around the front of it, we see the moai falling off the front towards the volcano side. On the front side facing the ocean, the stones are really, really nicely fit together, and they are huge. They look to be about 3 meters by 3 meters, and their join is perfectly together. We stood next to it, tried to reach up to the top of it, couldn't even put our fingers on top of this thing. That's how long and tall these stones were. They were definitely multi-ton. I'd say perhaps as much as 10 tons apiece. It was hard to see with the front faces how deep the stone went in, but it was definitely the same kind of Vinapu intense architecture. The stone masonry there was intense. And so there were 3 examples, plus Vinapu, of this kind of architecture. And that's saying something. So what do I conclude about that? Why are there some places that have this megalithic architecture nicely fit together, showing what excellent stonemasons the Rapa Nui were, and others don't. Well, I have a theory. So, okay, Vinapu, said to be Inca architecture, is not the only example on the island. We also have Ahu Tepeo, Tehare, and this one I think is Ahu Te Moa. Is that evidence that the Inca had more influence on the island than we thought? Well, that is possible. We have a lack of data in that regard, but I think it should still stay on the table. What I do see, though, is a chronology problem. The Inca really didn't start getting rolling until, let's say, the early 1400s, perhaps into the 1300s. But we've done archaeology, especially at Vinapu, that shows different dates. In fact, just recent re-studies digging up new parts around Vinapu have pretty much backed up what was said before, concluding that nothing about Vinapu is after 1300 CE, and some of it might be as early as 1000 CE. So that's a couple hundred years before the Inca really start building that intense architecture. We have a chronology problem. As far as chronology, another indicator there is out at Tehare. Now, there's been no archaeology there besides some cleanup. They took the bushes and things off of it, but they haven't moved any of the stones. And Ahu are funny. They're not one-offs. Oftentimes, we see the evidence that Ahu all around the island are rebuilt. They're expanded. Say, you've got a Ahu with 3 Moai that are your ancestors on it. Maybe the next generation wants to add a couple ancestors. So they put an extension onto the Ahu, and they put a couple more ancestors there. You get to places like Tongariki that have, I think, 18 across, and you can see how that one was rebuilt 4 or 5 times. So looking at Tehare, we have that really nicely fitted stone masonry on the north end of the wall. But on the south end of the wall, they attach that moai. And around that moai are smaller stones. It's a different kind of construction. Yes, there was a mega stone in there, the expired moai, but the architecture around it doesn't look exactly the same. So I suspect, even though there's been no archaeology there, that the megalithic part is probably more the age of Vinapu, and the one with the moai reused in it is from a later phase of that same village, which would mean that the architecture that was so finely built was older. Again, making it earlier than possible Inca contact. So what does explain it? What explains that those 4 Ahu, and maybe there are more, are so finely built and other ones are different? Well, an answer may lie in where the original clans on the island lived. There were as little as 9, maybe as much as 12 different clan villages around the island, but the head clan was the Meiru clan. They were the descendants of the first king that landed at Anakena Beach, and they had the most territory. In fact, their territory stretched from Anakena Beach across the northwest coast, down the west coast, through what's now the modern town, and barely hooking into a little spot that includes Vinapu. Which means that all 4 of these finely built megalithic masonry constructions were built within the Meiru territory. That makes sense to me. The Meiru were the richest clan. They would have the best stonemasons, and they would show off their wealth and ability by making bigger and better Ahu. To my mind, that's what explains it. There are special kinds of architecture that were just for the most wealthy and powerful clan, the Meiru. So in conclusion, we do have finely fitted architecture on Rapa Nui. It's more than just Vinapu. There's another 3 examples, so it's a pattern, it's an ability they have, and ultimately I don't ascribe it to Inca teaching the Rapa Nui. I think the Rapa Nui were just excellent stonemasons in their own right, and that stuff was the best things they made for the biggest, best clan. Thanks for watching my video. If you like what I do, please consider supporting me through Patreon. YouTube's ad revenue model sucks. You have to put up with clicking through weird commercials, and creators always get a pittance of the actual revenue. So let's not do that. Patreon is really a much more direct way to support the kind of content that you value. For just $5 a month, you can keep me in this chair instead of out there trying to make a living some other way. I am as cheap as a cup of coffee and considerably less bitter. My Patreon is actually linked to my podcast, Archaeoed, which if you haven't heard that, you might like that too. But here's the link right here to my Patreon through Archaeoed. I'll also put it in my show notes. Whatever you decide, thanks for watching. I appreciate you.